See you.
Hey everybody, how you
You
guys
too.
doing? We are live here. Welcome to today's live stream. We have a fellow carnivore. So today we'll be diving deep into the topic of children of all ages following a carnivore diet. So Dr. Chaffee, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
Well, you're very welcome. I'm still just a neurosurgical resident, though. I'm certainly not a famous neurosurgeon, but
Oh, okay. Sorry
working on
about
it
that.
anyway. That's all right.
Hey, I'm a promoter, man. I'm a hype man, so maybe I
Yeah,
hyped you up a
that's all
little too
good.
much, but um, but before we get started with our topic, could you tell our audience a little bit about your background? Since you and clarify maybe what I did say, and then how you got into carnivore.
Yeah, well, so I'm an American medical doctor. I work currently in Australia. I'm in my neurosurgical residency, but I've just had a special interest in diet and nutrition and how that affects health and chronic disease. For most of my life as an athlete, as a biology student, and now as a doctor, and I found it's one of the most powerful tools in my life to be healthy and to reach peak athletic performance and health, but also more importantly in my family and my patients' lives. And this is one of the strongest tools that I've seen that can actually reverse quite a number of diseases and ailments that people never thought could be reversed. Well, simply because we didn't know what caused these things, we were just treating the symptoms. And I think that we're now figuring out that it's actually the food that is causing the disease. And now you remove the sort of things that we eat. We remove that from our environment. You start eating a more biologically appropriate diet, something that humans are designed to eat, and that these problems go away. So that's what I've sort of been dedicating my spare time to, is just sort of getting that message out there to people so that they can get better and feel good.
Absolutely. And we're glad you're doing that because you are a busy guy and it's a blessing to have you take whatever spare time you do have and to give it to us. How did you find the carnivore diet quick? How did you get into it?
So I came across, well, I came to it basically not as the carnivore diet, not by that name, not by any other name. I wasn't doing a specific diet. I had just studied biology and botany and cancer biology and learned how toxic plants were, how this was their main defense in nature because they're stationary. They can't run away or fight back like animals can, but everything fights back. And so plants make about 1 million different defense chemicals. Many of those are toxic. Many of those are carcinogenic, as per the WHO, as per every botany book on earth, as per my cancer biology professor. And he was just going through all the different carcinogens that were in plants naturally, talking about how toxic plants were by nature. And it was very, very mind blowing to us because this is the exact, no one had ever suggested this. Now there's at least that conversation happening. At that time, there was no conversation happening. So this is the first time any of us had ever heard this. And so we were very taken aback by this. I remember thinking, I was like, well, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And he looked at us, he gave us a funny look, and he just said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. And I was like, okay, screw plants. And I'm just not going to eat these things anymore. So I wasn't doing carnivore. I didn't think about it as I should have, which was, hey, humans have been apex predators and carnivores for millions of years. This is kind of what I'm doing. I'm going back before the agricultural revolution. But I didn't. I just went, okay, I'm just never eating a plant. And so I just defaulted into eating meat and eggs. And it was a massive, massive improvement in my health and certainly in my athletic performance. That was night and day difference. And so I did that for a number of years, but because I wasn't doing a diet and I wasn't doing something that was biologically appropriate and thinking about things in ancestral terms and biological terms, eventually I sort of slipped off of it, just from situation. When I was in England playing rugby over there, I didn't have the same access to food that I did in America. Some of the meat was breaded and I just sort of got it out of convenience and thought to myself, as the argument goes now, well, but poison is dose dependent. And so I said that to myself, well, poison depends on the dose. So maybe a little bit of this won't really hurt. It did though. Yeah, dose makes a poison. That dose is really damn small. So I mean, think about it this way: you have 4 grams of glucose running through your body at any given time. That's a level teaspoon of glucose, right? Mm-hmm. Even just 1 gram more glucose in your body, more blood sugar, that is a toxic dose. and your body responds to it as a toxic dose by trying to detoxify it by raising your insulin to bring that below 4 grams, and it causes huge disruption to your body. If you maintain it above 4 grams, this is where you start seeing the complications of diabetes, of uncontrolled diabetes, like leg amputations, kidney failure, heart failure, and all sorts of other sorts of ailments. So it's a fine line. It's a very fine line. Our bodies need to be fueled in very precise ways. It can handle other ways, but the wheels start to fall off eventually. And so if you want your wheels to stay on, you should think about what actually goes in your body. And so, yeah, that's how I did that. But I slipped off of it. And then 6 years ago now, I came across Sean Baker on Joe Rogan's podcast. My brother saw it. He said, hey, there's this doctor. He used to play rugby, and he's saying you can get all your nutrition from meat. And instantly my first response was like, well, that's crazy. You can't. And then I was like, hold on a second. I did that for like 5 years. And that was a period of my life that I've never felt better in my life. And so I was like, okay. And I remember thinking about it at the time. I was like, am I missing some vitamins? Do I need to eat a banana or something? And I remember thinking, I was like, well, I feel good. My gums aren't bleeding. So let's just ride this out, see what happens. And it was 5 years. There's no issues. The exact opposite, in fact. And so I took a look at it, and within 5 minutes, I realized that I was just like, no, this is really, he's really onto something. And there was more to the story than that, because I had the sort of the plant background, my own experience with it. But also, the data on fructose that started coming out showing that this was very problematic to people's health, and that fat and cholesterol and LDL were probably not what they were cracked up to be. And so at that point, I sort of said to myself, like, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me, get rid of these stupid things. And it just completely revitalized my health. I was 38 years old at the time. And then within 2 weeks, I felt like I was 22 again. And I'd lost 23 pounds in 2 weeks. And I just felt amazing. Just all this inflammation just shed off my body. And I went back and started playing rugby again because it felt good. And I wanted to. So it was at that point I started really digging into the research and really thinking about it. I'm like, hold on a second. Humans actually are carnivores. That is the kind of animal that we are. And that's what I was doing. I was living as a carnivore. I was living to our biological design. This makes sense now. And I started looking at this from a medical point of view. Humans are carnivores, and we're not eating as such. We're eating outside of that. And just any zoo with the signs that say don't feed the animals, it makes them very sick to not eat their natural diet. I applied that to us. I was like, okay, this makes sense now. Everything just started slotting into place. And so that's when I started really digging into the literature. I was, I had some spare time at that time because I was helping with a family emergency. I was just back from doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh. And so I had time, and I just spent like 10, 12 hours, 8 to 10 hours a day, just digging into the literature and just asking questions and seeing, what answers we had. And here we are. Now I'm trying to share that with others.
And yeah, that's an awesome, and I'm glad you're here. So thank you for accepting the invitation. So let's dive right into the topic. Kids on carnivore. Just flat out, do you think we should put any kids on the carnivore diet, doctor?
I think that we should put every kid on the carnivore diet. And I mean, think about it just from, again, a natural point of view. Every single mammal on Earth drinks their mother's milk and then gets weaned onto the mother's diet and then eats that diet the rest of their life and teaches their kids how to eat that diet. It is uniform across the board. And that's certainly the case for us. And you look at indigenous populations, that holds to that exact model as well. So this is what we're designed to eat. This is how we get the best nutrition, and proper nutrition is most important when kids are developing. That's when their brains are developing, their bodies are developing. If you look pre and post agriculture, there's a clear demarcation in the fossil record. It's not hundreds of years or thousands of years. It's overnight. Everywhere in the world that has switched to agriculture, regardless of the location, regardless of the time period, regardless of the crop, a similar pattern occurs. The height and health of these people decline. The dental health, oral health, the jaws, the teeth, they all started declining. The height decline, the femoral length decline. They had signs of poor wound healing, signs of infectious disease. And the brains shrank by 11% for adult males, by 17% for adult females. That's persisted until today. That is developmental. That is not genetic. That is not evolutionary. That is not normal. That is not supposed to happen. So if you want your child to develop properly, if you want their brains to develop properly, their nervous system to develop properly, to grow to the height that they're designed to grow to, not anything abnormal. You're not, it's not like this, like Chinese, Yao Ming experiment where they're just pumping in growth hormone into people or something like that. This is just having them develop to their genetic potential. We're not doing a Gattaca or something like that, where we're just like freaky playing with people's genetics. This is how they're supposed to develop. And so if you want your kids to develop to that point, it's not a small difference. It's not a subtle difference. It's a massive difference. And I've seen women breastfeeding who have switched to a carnivore diet while breastfeeding, and the kids' development just takes off. I mean, it really just, it's going at a good pace. That's normal. Everything's great. And all of a sudden, wham, it just spikes up. And, one lady that I went to, that I knew when I was in medical school, and we were friends then, she went carnivore sort of when she was pregnant with her first child, and it completely cleared up her morning sickness. She had hyperemesis, projectile vomiting every single day for 32 weeks. And I think that's a protective measure. Your body's saying, hey, there's stuff in here that it's not good for the baby. Get this stuff out. And it's the most important time to be on a proper diet is when you're pregnant, obviously. That fetus is in ketosis. Breastfeeding babies are in ketosis. That's because they need to be for their brain to grow properly, because you need ketones to grow your brain. And so she switched over. Hyperemesis stopped. She had a completely normal pregnancy after that. The kid's developing great, but she's still eating some grains and oats because her mom said that was a good thing for her milk. After about 3 months, she decided, well, you know what? I'm just going to go full bore on this. She stopped. At 3 months old, her baby was 50th percentile in height, length, and weight. In 1 month, she went to 99th percentile in head circumference and length. So really advancing to the point that her pediatric nurse looked at this. She's got hydrocephalus. She's going to have to go to a neurosurgeon. Oh my God, she's going to die. And she was perfect. She was fine. When you have hydrocephalus, that's pressure on the brain, and it's very serious. You get you can really damage the brain, and this child gets very lethargic and sleepy. They go into comas and they die. And so turns out, of course, she did not have hydrocephalus. Her brain was just developing and growing, and she was, doing very, very well. And so all her subsequent kids are just literally off the charts, with their development. So yeah, it is the most important time to develop. I'll do you one more. There's a disease in cows that is exactly the same as muscular dystrophy in humans. It's called muscular dystrophy, but it's called nutritional muscular dystrophy in cows. And that's because they figured out it's actually from a selenium deficiency. And so in the genetically susceptible cows that aren't getting enough selenium, they develop muscular dystrophy. And so what you do is just give them salt lick, sort of mineral lick with selenium in it, sorts it right out. Well, that begs the question, is our muscular dystrophy selenium or some sort of other nutritional deficiency? And how many other childhood maladies are nutritional deficiencies? Diet is strongly related and tied up to autism. And in fact, the University of Texas A&M showed that a carnitine deficiency, which we're told is a non-essential amino acid, but it is not non-essential for everybody. Only 70% of people make enough of it. And you can only get it from meat, and you really mostly get it from red meat. And so vegans and vegetarians who don't eat much or any animal products, and certainly no red meat, they can be very deficient in this. And so if their children don't make enough carnitine, they can develop autism because of that, because the brain needs carnitine, it needs choline, it needs all these sorts of things, and your brain does not develop properly. So yes, long-winded answer, but yes, I think that it's the most important time to feed kids a proper diet, and that diet for us is meat.
And I'll ask one more question, and we'll pass it off to Courtney next. You just mentioned autism. Do you think a child on autism would improve on the carnivore diet in any sort of way?
I do think so, and there's evidence for that. There's published literature on that. There's a paper that actually argued for ketogenic diets in general as a treatment modality for autism. There are there are groups that treat autism that specifically use ketogenic diets, like, carnivore diet is a ketogenic diet, and this just helps the brain develop. Professor Chris Palmer from Harvard thinks the same. He wrote about this in his book Brain Energy, and he thinks that a lot of mental health issues like schizophrenia, but also autism, are from a misdevelopment or from a malfunction of the mitochondria. When you're developing, the mitochondria are obviously even more important because they help with the development. The mitochondria don't just make energy; they sort of run the ship. They're like sailors on a ship going up and down the mast and rigging and all these sorts of things. They move around and use utensils, or like a factory worker. They move around between machines and use the machines, right? So they're making energy, but they're not just putting it out into space. They are physically moving to this organelle, pumping out a bunch of ATP so that can do its job. And so they're running the entire program. They're actually moving these machines inside the cells. So they're really, really important. And when you get dysfunction, it's just not going to work properly. And when you get dysfunction and it's not working properly, when you're developing, it causes huge lasting ramifications like autism. And so there are already papers, there are already publications saying that, hey, look, this is a viable treatment modality for autism. And I've certainly seen that in practice with different people and their families and their children and their personal experiences. Adults with autism, have found, Jonathan Griffiths, who's a British bodybuilder, we did a couple podcasts together, very nice guy. And he said that, and this sort of came up, and he mentioned that he actually has autism. I would have never guessed that. And he said that a year ago, before he started Carnivore, he would not have been able to have the conversation we were having right then. So yes, it can absolutely help. Obviously, if you catch it early enough, that's going to be better. The child's brain is going to develop better, but even as an adult, it helps it function better. So there's some sort of issue with your brain running on glucose that's not really helpful for it. Obviously, it slows down the mitochondria. Your insulin is raised, and so it doesn't let your cells turn over, doesn't let your mitochondria turn over. So just being in ketosis, after a few months, you have 4 times the number of mitochondria, and they're 4 times as effective. That's what the literature shows. And so this goes for your brain as well. And so when you're developing, obviously that makes a much greater impact. And you can turn a lot of things around, just getting enough carnitine. If that's why you're developing autism, or that specific type of autism that derives from a carnitine deficiency, that obviously you can start correcting the ship, and then you have enough carnitine, and that actually is integral in mitochondrial health as well. And so you have enough carnitine, your mitochondria are working better, you're on a ketogenic diet, your mitochondria are really working better, your brain starts developing better, your neurons start developing better, and you can actually reverse a lot of the symptoms of autism. That's in the literature, and that's what people are experiencing. It's not necessarily going to do that for everyone, but I have yet to see someone who it didn't.
Wow. Love it, doctor. I want to introduce you to Courtney, the holistic carnivore. How are you doing, Courtney?
I'm doing well. How are you?
We're doing great. You got a question for the doc?
I do. So, Dr. Chaffee, I'm actually an integrative and functional nutrition PhD candidate studying the carnivore diet's effects on HbA1c.
Nice.
So I have some pretty heavy questions. My first question, you're talking about the role of, diet with autism, and it makes me think about the current Western diet and how it's so laden with gluten, not just from flour and bread sources, right? And we know that the mechanism of gluten has some interaction with dopamine receptors in the brain. And so I know that some parents might have a concern when they're bringing their children off of carbohydrates about the potential of some misbehavior and struggles with mood swings. Can you expand a bit on how to maybe mitigate these challenges if a parent were to go, you know what, that's it, plants are out, right? And say, okay, now we're on to meat. How do you think they should handle that?
Well, look, that's a very good question. And it's especially depending on the child's age, especially if they're carbohydrate addicted, sugar addicted, it can be very difficult, and if they're teenagers, obviously they're by definition going to be more rebellious, and they're going to be able to go to school, they're going to go out with their friends, they're just going to buy whatever the hell they want. But depending on your relationship with your kids, you can obviously talk to them, educate them, say, hey, look, this is a really important thing. It's obviously always the best thing to do. If they're young enough, you can obviously start. You control what goes in that house at that point, and you can just sort of stop buying these certain things, or maybe just start buying less and less and sort of weaning them off. And there's just a little less and little less. And like, oh, where's that treat or that snack? It was just like, oh, we don't have that right now. Can I make you some eggs or something like that? And you just sort of, work them into that realm. Doing a hard stop can be hard for a lot of people, and especially for kids that aren't used to that and don't understand why that's going on. So it doesn't have to be an overnight thing necessarily unless someone is very unwell. But especially for kids with autism, that they can be very tactile. They maybe just don't like certain things because it feels funny to them. They don't like how it feels in their mouth. They don't like eating it. And so, but there generally is something that they will eat from the animal kingdom, and you can just sort of try to introduce those and make those much more available, and just sort of start weaning things off. And the teenagers are difficult. I think you just need to sort of reason with them and just talk to them more about, hey, look, this is what I'm doing, and this is a lot better, and this is why, and talk about the benefits of it. And then you just sort of have a bit less and a bit less and a bit less in the house. And so it's like, listen, if you want that stuff, you can, but I really don't want this in the house, and try that way. Or, hey, would you be willing to do this with me for 30 days to help me do this, and all that sort of stuff. And so quite often, if you have, depending on your relationship with your kids, they'll be interested in doing what you're doing. And, if you're, that's how kids learn. That's all mammals study their parents to see how do I survive? How do I make it? So those are some of the things, but it can be difficult. When you're transitioning off carbohydrates and sugar, they're drugs, and they have effects on your brain and your dopamine, as you said. And so there can be a lag period before you start feeling your best. And you may even feel pretty wretched, going through withdrawals. Hopefully it's not that severe. Hopefully people start feeling better straight away. And maybe you early on, the kids, if they have a special meat or whatever that they're really fond of, you just go for that. So you get all their favorite sort of meals. It's like, wow, this is fun. This is great. I like this. I'm eating like a king here. And then it's not as hard of a transition. Then after a couple of weeks, they're going to feel amazing. And then they sort of slip off of that, and they don't feel as good. And they sort of point out, well, okay, well, what did you eat? Well, I actually had this thing, and now my back's sore and my knees are aching, and and I have my muscle soreness after I worked out, and I wasn't sore before that. And you just start pointing out that, yeah, that's because of the things you're eating, and it just sort of self reinforces after that for most of them. But yeah, it's difficult. Some people are just going to be a tough case.
Absolutely. I just want to, we'll work our way around here. Nia, from Nia's Way, that's her YouTube channel. Do you have a question for Dr. Chaffee?
I do, but I also have my little one right here who's been talking to me. So are you good, baby? I'm so sorry.
No, you're all good. That's fine.
I do have a question. I actually thank you, by the way, for doing this with us. I'm excited to meet you and thankful that you're answering all our questions, because it's kind of a little scary sometimes to be in this way of eating and then trying to do the right thing by our kids and wanting to make sure that that's the case, especially like when you go to the pediatrician, like I did earlier this week, just for a wellness exam with my 3 and almost 4-year-old daughter. And she was kind of just going through the motions and didn't stop to really pry into what I mentioned about diet. But she pointed something out to me, and I thought it would be, something I would like to ask about milk consumption. So I was fortunate enough to be able to breastfeed my baby for about 2 years, but then I switched to whole milk after that. And she's slightly lactose intolerant. My fiance, her dad is completely lactose intolerant. And so we just kind of assumed that that's where that came from. So we give her lactose-free whole milk, and she still drinks a lot of milk. She probably drinks maybe 5 to 6 cups a day. And so I was telling the pediatrician that, and she said that toddlers should really be limited to about 24 ounces of milk per day. She said drinking whole milk was good, which I was happy to hear. But she said that due to, like, if she wasn't drinking any more iron fortified formula, that if I had switched her from formula to milk, which we didn't talk about the fact that I had breastfed her, but since she wasn't getting that supplemented iron through the formula, that there was a potential for the milk to actually reduce her iron absorption from the food that she's eating. And that's why she recommended to limit it. And so I was curious. I did a little bit of reading, and I saw, some opinions saying that, well, that might be the case if they're not consuming enough red meat or, other iron sources in their diet, which she does. So, outside of getting her iron levels tested, do you think there's any issue with limiting the milk that, toddler age kids drink or young children drink?
So I think that obviously if you're gonna have milk, you do whole milk. The kids are much. I think about it from a different point of view. I don't think it's necessarily going to cause an iron deficiency, but obviously that's easy to check. But I think younger kids, especially infants, can't do well on cow's milk because it has a lot more casein than our milk does, or breast milk does, and it's not good for their development. They can't really, they really can't necessarily survive on cow's milk, and that's why historically they would use goat's milk if they haven't had a surrogate, if they couldn't get like a wet nurse or something like that, and the mom couldn't breastfeed for whatever reason. But I think of it more from a term of ketosis. Like I was saying, your body needs to be in ketosis for your brain to properly develop. And when kids are young, then it's a lot easier for them to be in ketosis. But if you get enough sugar, you will force them out of that. And as they get older, it's a bit more difficult. And then when we're adults, we really just have to avoid carbs for days, and then we get back into it. And so, for her brain development, optimal brain development, I would probably limit it just because of the carbohydrates and just trying to keep her in ketosis, because the ketones cross the blood-brain barrier and reconstitute into fatty acids. And those are used as the physical building blocks and material of the brain. And so if you don't have an abundant supply of ketones, if you're not in ketosis pretty much all the time, then you are going to limit the amount of available material to grow her brain and nervous system. So that would be my main concern. I don't think it's necessarily bad, like it's going to harm her. It's just going to not be as optimal as other things, and might limit her development in that sense. Certainly at some point, if she has enough carbs, or even now, this is the problem too. People go to formulas, tons of sugar or other sorts of, baby food, kids food, tons of sugar, and it's kicking them out of ketosis. It's keeping them from having that proper brain development. And so we didn't get proper brain development for the last 10,000 years because, we've curtailed that. If she is eating a lot of meat and red meat, she's going to get a lot of heme iron. A lot of those things are looking at people eating a standard diet. So if a normal kid eating a normal diet were to drink that much milk, could that limit the iron? That's where your pediatrician is coming from, because that's all the data we have. Never really looked at this from kids that are drinking milk and red meat, and that's it, or a lot of red meat. So I wouldn't think that would be much of a problem, although I'm not a pediatrician and I don't know for sure, but I would expect that she would be fine on that. If you are concerned, I would get a blood test, but I would probably limit milk actually for other reasons as well. I think that it is important. It's most important for kids to be in ketosis and to have enough abundance of ketones available for their brain to develop. And I would just, like I said, mammals drink mother's milk and then they wean onto what the adults are eating, and then they just eat that. And although milk is very nutritious in a lot of ways, especially raw milk, it is not the same as meat. It's not the same thing as meat. And that's our optimal food. And so I think it would be better to just eat meat at that stage. But I don't think it's horrible. I think there's a lot of really good things in it. And it's certainly better than any of the bloody formula, iron supplemented or not. It's like the, American formula is required to have seed oils in it, because it's supposed to it has to have a certain amount of polyunsaturated fats to be, healthy. And that's not healthy. Those aren't healthy polyunsaturated fats. And so that's something that's required. So you're going to have to get a bunch of seed oils and omega-6, especially linoleic acid. That is not a building block material. People say it's an essential fatty acid, but I was actually just speaking to Harvard psychiatrist named Georgia Ede. Just wrote a book called Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. And she talks about how important it is to be on proper diet and even a carnivore diet to fix mental health issues. And she was saying that she didn't think that omega-6 was essential at all. In fact, it's only essential to make arachidonic acid. And they're like, well, you need it because you need arachidonic acid. It's like, you get arachidonic acid if you eat red meat, right? So if you eat meat, you're already going to get that. So you actually don't need omega-6s. There are omega-6s in meat and pretty much everything anyway. So you'll get a bit anyway. You don't need to go after it. But if you get an abundance of this actually goes into the brain. This is not used as a building block material. Omega-3 fatty acids like DHA and EPA are. ALA, which is in plants, is not. That does not go well for your brain. But the omega-6s can go into the brain. And because they're not used as structural components, they actually are burned for energy. And that's a bad thing because your brain's supposed to be running on ketones, these shorter sort of fatty acid derivatives. And the omega-6 is very long, very unstable polyunsaturated omega-6 fatty acid. And this breaks down, it gives a lot of oxidative stress and a lot of free radicals and can actually damage your brain because it's running on this pretty poor fuel. And so you really want, especially in a developing brain, but any brain, you don't want to have an abundance of linoleic acid omega-6s. And so I would definitely avoid formulas as well. So this is definitely better than 99.99% of what other parents are feeding their kids. So, already that's amazing. You're already doing a lot of great things for your kids. I think that, if we're thinking about milk, I think the reason to stop milk would be just, for those other reasons described. And also it doesn't have all the nutrients you need. Meat has all the nutrients she needs. And so, it's not deficient in any respect in that range, as long as you're getting, good quality meat with a lot of fat. So I think that it can be improved, but you're already doing better than almost everybody. So well done.
Great question, Nia, and great response, Dr. Chaffee. Jeff, you're up next, buddy. Can you hear me, Jeff? I know you met Jeff before, Doctor.
Yeah. How you doing, man?
Doc, good. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you.
You got a question, Jeff, for Dr. Chaffee?
Well, not really, but I do want to to anybody watching this, I want to explain that, especially because I work with teenagers, not only as a high school phys ed teacher, but I have 2 teenage sons, 15 and 13. And my sons and myself have been watching Dr. Anthony Chaffee for about probably 22 months. And you are our Superman. You are our Michael Jordan. You are just everything about you we admire. And I want to thank you so much for being here, because I hope that some of the teenagers I work with see this video, because myself and my good friend Dwight, that I coach a lot of sports with, we're constantly working with teenage athletes, and we're telling them the success that we're having as adults, and especially me. Everybody knows I'm dealing with stage 4 cancer, and I'm thriving. My energy's through the roof. And speaking of Dr. Anthony Chaffee, you spoke about you can role model for your kids, and it's very easy to influence your kids on what to eat. And basically, the households that the kids are eating too much sugar and too much this, too much carbs, it's not the kid's fault. It's the parents. Everything is always the parents' fault. And I know it's a very hard topic, because these athletes that we work with, Dr. Chaffee, they get really intrigued, and then they start asking questions. And some of them, they want to try it. Some of them go home and tell their parents the stuff that we're talking about. And then the next thing you know, the principal of my high school is like, you can't talk about the carnivore diet. You got to talk to the Canada's Food Guide or US Food Guide or whatever, right? And you know what? It's disappointing how we have to shelter it and hide it. So my question to you is, I think I know the answer, but I want to hear what you say professionally in terms of how you think we can get the word out to kids, to teenagers, on how to be optimal, how to be great athletes, and use food for fuel on the sport field.
Well, I mean, I think it's a bit ridiculous that you're not allowed to give nutritional advice. You're a physical education teacher. This is part of physical education. Being a coach, I certainly was given nutritional advice from my coaches at that time. It was all low fat, all that sort of crap. And so, but we were given advice, right? And just because that advice, went along certain guidelines and principles doesn't mean that they weren't giving advice, right? You are allowed to do that. And so, one of the things too is that you can go to the parents first and say, hey, listen, this is a program, like if you were coaching a team, hey, this is something that we've had really good success with. And on a special diet is really good for performance. And you talk about it that way. And we have doctors and things like that involved. It's not going to hurt them. It's not going to cause ill health, and we're not doing anything unsafe for them. And you guys can elect to do this or not, but this is what we recommend for our athletes. And our athletes that do this have better performance and better health. And you can just do it that way. And then the parents start going, oh, okay, all right, interesting. We'll think about it. Maybe they choose no, but at least it's out there. It's in the open, and they don't feel like their kids are being unduly influenced, sort of, behind their back. Also, you can just say, well, look, this is what I do. This is what I've had good success with. You guys can do what you want. You can look it up. There's a lot of people on YouTube, and do what you want, and then that sort of protects you. You're suggesting it out there. Your people know about it, and they can do their own research. They can look into it themselves, and they can say, well, I'm going to do this. But if it's difficult when you're in a situation like that, because if you get a bunch of pissed off parents, that can impact, your work. I mean, I have to tread lightly in certain aspects of my career, because, until I'm, done with everything in neuroscience, and these are my patients and my practice, I have to be careful in that. But I still, when someone has a serious issue, like they have cancer or something like that, I don't think it's ethical to withhold that information. And so even though it's, the hospital doesn't necessarily want me talking about this with patients, I still feel that in certain circumstances, I can't get around this. And I just say, oh, this is just me. This is not the hospital. This is not the department. I'm coming to you on my own time. But this is something that I've found. Here's some literature. You take a look at this yourself, because I don't think that it's ethical to withhold that and just be like, well, I know that this has worked and helped people survive their cancer and better, and treat their cancer better, and help their life. And I know that, and that's in the literature. This is evidence-based medicine. So I don't think that it's that I'm morally able to not tell them, and for me, I'm practicing evidence-based medicine. This is in the literature. There are clinical trials showing that this works in this situation. And so just because the hospital doesn't fucking get that yet, that's really not my problem. And I'm not going to make it my patient's problem. It's nicer in my private practice, because I can say whatever the hell I want, because they're coming to see me privately. But, you do have to sort of, play the game a little bit. So there are ways to do that. You just say, hey, look, this is what I'm doing. The kids already know about it now, right? That's gonna get people interested. People are going to start asking you questions. Well, look, this is what I do, and this is why I do it. And here's some, you can check these things out if you want to. I mean, I can't tell you, one way or the other, blah blah blah. Or you can do the whole thing with like coaching. Hey, this is what we're going to try to do as a team. This seems to work. Try to get the parents on board and make it a more open and public sort of thing. Because the first time everyone here probably heard about this, they just went, excuse me, is that really what you're doing? And so we have to remember that parents of these kids are going to be doing the same thing. And so meat only, hold on, that causes cancer and heart disease and all that. It's killing the environment, and oh my God, and all the Loraxes are gone now. And so it's like, they're going to freak out, unless it's sort of, prefaced in the right way. So you could try that as well, and hopefully get more and more traction.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Anthony Chaffee. And you're right, just being proactive. I've always been, as a teacher, having parent meetings and stuff like that at the beginning to lay it all out. But with me being off work, it's a little more difficult. I just show up to coach the teams. And it's the only other thing I just want to add in. It's a little frustrating because I've taught nutrition for 21 years. I'm a little bit embarrassed of what I've taught, but my son, Peter, who's in grade 10 at my high school, he had nutrition taught in health this year, and his phys ed teacher, who's there teaching for me because I'm off, she's a vegetarian, and she can tell her story. She can tell her story about being a vegetarian, and nobody complains. But then, the carnivore people are all up in arms. Not everybody, there's always just a few that are up in arms about it. Most of them are pretty intrigued they see what I'm doing, because I was supposed to be dead 2 years ago. So they see what I'm doing, and they're pretty intrigued. And you're absolutely right. Especially the boys really ask the questions because they're into building muscle and getting stronger and faster. So are girls too. But the boys, they really get intrigued by whatever superpower you can offer them.
Well, it's a little bullshit that no one's pushing back against the vegetarian garbage, because like that's a nutritionally deficient diet.
Yes.
And like Italy is just like passed some laws like you're not allowed to push a vegetarian vegan diet for kids, because it's not even an inferior diet, it's just an insufficient diet for kids. You do not get all the nutritional materials for child development. So if your principal is letting her get away with that shit, I'd push back on that. Just be like, listen, she's pushing this shit.
Absolutely.
And that's nutritionally deficient. You can't even get B12 from that crap. What the hell is that supposed to do? You get brain damage if your B12 goes too low. And there was a study out of Oxford in 2008 that showed that vegans, after 5 years, their brains shrank by over 5%. And I see this in neurosurgery all the time. I've spoken to other neurosurgical colleagues about this. You see the atrophy of the spinal cord, it thins out, because they're not getting the building material for their nervous system and their nerves. And part of that is B12. This B12 is integral for myelinating the axons, which are your nerve fibers that come down. And without proper myelination, you don't get proper conductivity. Your brain doesn't work properly. Your body doesn't work properly. And you can get neurological dysfunction. You can get nerve damage. You can get brain damage, especially developmental damage as well. And the Oxford authors of that paper thought that it was the grossly insufficient amount of B12 that these people had, and that B12 level is within the normal limits for B12 in America, Australia, and Europe. And they found that was grossly insufficient. It's within the normal damn range. So, this is not acceptable. And so you should just, it'd be nice. And, I'm sure you're friends with the principal. Just be like, hey, Miss May is pushing this shit. Why can't I? Why can't I give the counterpoint? I teach nutrition. I've been teaching this for 22 years. That's my class. Why am I not allowed to do that? Why am I not allowed to advise my kids and my, that are playing on my teams, what to do? I mean, this is a performance-based, endeavor. Like you need your body to work properly. Of course, nutrition is part of that. I teach nutrition. This is my job to give proper nutritional advice. And you don't need to say carnivore diet. You're saying, hey guys, we're going to do a biologically appropriate diet. We're going to eat what humans have been designed to eat. This is the best nutrition for humans. And so, this is like, look back, what are people eating during the ice ages? There are footprints and fossilized footprints over in Eastern Australia. And, the early Aboriginals, this is like, 20, 30,000 years old. They're in clay. They were running in wet clay, right? Presumably after some animal, right? And the stride length, they had 3 people running, and they estimated that one of these guys was running faster than Usain Bolt over like a half-mile stretch on wet freaking clay, right? This is just, people were just badasses, and when you eat what you're supposed to eat, your body's going to work in magically different ways, as everyone here can attest to. And this is most important, again, for kids, development, and athleticism. So, if you guys want, if you want, these kids to be the best and all these sorts of things, like, why wouldn't you want me to suggest this sort of shit? They're saying, oh, just eat a bunch of plants and all that sort of stuff, and that's fine. Why does that get a pass? I'm talking about something that we've been eating for 2 million years. Where's the harm there? When heart disease showed up in 1912, right? So what's the problem? We were eating meat before that. We didn't just start eating meat. What we started eating a lot more of was plants and processed crap. So, I don't know. I think I'd cause a bit of a ruckus in that situation.
Thanks for having my back there.
No worries, Ben.
Love it, Jeff. Great question. Ellie, you're up next. Nourishment Redacted is her YouTube channel. How you doing, Ellie?
I'm so thankful to be here tonight. I want to thank Dr. Chaffee. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You were one of the first doctors that I found about the carnivore diet. It's changed my life. And I don't want my children to suffer from obesity, mental health issues, and rosacea, and so many more horrible things when I was like on the standard American diet. And I never want my children to be as sick as I was. And so I actually, I'm so passionate about this. I have a little series on my channel called Mother Knows Best, Meat-Based Kids, where I invite mothers and experts to talk about this topic. And, you know, I used to be a parent that was so confused about how to feed children. And now my 18-month-old who started carnivore at 6 months old, and my daughter who's 3.5, she started about like 5 months ago. I see the difference in them. Like, they are amazing, beautiful children. And, but then there's something that like weighs heavy on my heart. It's like children naturally develop an interest in building different skills as they age. And we as parents, we want to foster that passion, no matter like how simple or complex. But, you know, my carnivore daughter, she had an interest in baking bread and cake. And I know she's young, but it's like, I see sugar as absolutely horrible for people. And I'm so disgusted by like sugary desserts and most baked goods. But, you know, I understand it's not the best nutritionally for her, but like she wants to learn the skill of baking bread. She wants to learn like how to make cakes. And I know she's young, but she's like, you know, she's very intelligent. I'd say she's like mentally like more like a 5-year-old, like with the way she speaks, which is a blessing. But obviously I want her to eat whole foods as much as possible, meat-based whole foods, maybe a few berries every once in a while. But like, should I discourage her? Like, I know she's only 3.5, but it's just like, I don't want to squash like, you know, her interest in like wanting to gain these skills. And there's other things that kids might come up and say, oh, I want to do this. But I was just curious about what you thought about that.
Yeah, well, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, you do want to try to help encourage things, and if they find they have an interest in something, then that's great. I mean, you certainly don't want them eating it afterwards. And so I guess you talk to them, it's like, well, you know, we can make this, we can learn at it, but like, I don't think it's really good to eat it, but it might be fun to do, and maybe we can do that. And if she's happy with that, then great, you know. And it might be that you can say, oh, actually, there's this other thing too, and you start, you know, shifting her over to cooking more carnivore sort of stuff and say, hey, this is fun too. Look, we can do this recipe. We can make waffles out of, you know, cheese and eggs and all that sort of stuff. And like, look, and it comes out just like a waffle. Isn't that great? And it tastes better and it's good for you too. And all that sort of stuff. And, you know, I mean, but yeah, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, it's, I want to use an extreme example here, but I don't know. I mean, it's just like if you know, if she was saying, is this like, Mom, I don't want to smoke crack, but I really want to learn how to make a crack pipe. It's like, no, what are you talking about? You know, we're not going to do that. That's ridiculous. Obviously, it's not the same thing, but it's sort of think about that. It's just like, it's like, well, do you need these skills? It's not something that's going to benefit you, you know, in your life and in your health. You know, having those skills is maybe something, you know, down the road that might be fun to do, but you know, is that something that is that a skill that's going to benefit you long term, you know, and as knowing how to do that, you know, are you ever going to use that again? You know, if you're not ever going to eat this way, and if you are going to eat that way, well, that's, you know, that's not going to be good for your health. So, but, you know, I think that, you know, just having fun with your daughter and having her cook things, but just, you know, impressing upon her, just saying, hey, look, we can do that, but I really don't think it's good for us to eat this. It's not a good thing for us to eat. It can be fun and we can do that, but we shouldn't eat it. Is that okay? Would you want to eat it afterwards? And like, well, I kind of would want. Okay, well, then we probably should think about making something else that we would want to eat that would be good for our bodies. You know, maybe you can try it that way. I don't know. I mean, it's a difficult one, you know, because I agree. I think it's really good to sort of foster those sorts of those feelings when they want to learn something and learn a new skill. Sometimes that can be sort of molded and shifted directions. But yeah, just because you cook it doesn't mean you have to eat it too.
Okay. Yeah, I completely understand that because unfortunately, she used to have quite a meat aversion. Like When we first started a carnivore diet, it was really difficult to get her to transition. We did it though. Like she's eating, I'd say 90% meat, and then we have berries every once in a while. Sometimes carbs come in, but it's so rare now. Like I wouldn't even like count it. So I really appreciate that. And I'm glad they used a more extreme example because it hits hard, and you learn, like, you know, we as humans, we learn from things that hurt us. And so I was like, yeah, you know what? Maybe I don't want to do that. So I really appreciate that.
No problem.
Love it, Ellie. Rebecca, you're up next from Carnivore Wellness. That's her YouTube channel if you guys want to check it out. Got a question for Dr. Chaffee, Rebecca?
Thank you, JT. And Dr. Chaffee, thank you for being so generous with your time to be here with us and answer these questions and highlight this topic. So I'm a little nervous to ask my question because I think that after hearing everything, I know the answer. But in my situation, you know, I didn't know about carnivore when I was pregnant or breastfeeding or when my kids were, you know, weaning off of, you know, breast milk onto food, and we're late to the game. So my kids don't eat a perfectly carnivore diet. And at this point, I am the only carnivore in the household. So without that support of my husband and, you know, being able to make sure that everything that they get is 100% carnivore, they are largely animal based, still with some of those other, you know, carb, sugar laden treats, you know, more often than I would like. But I really am only in control a portion of the time as far as how often they get those things. So my question to you is, if my kids are animal based, which they are, and they're still eating the things like, you know, they're getting fruit, they're getting that fructose. You mentioned that was not great. You know, I know that's not ideal, but I have concerns, and my husband's expressed concerns as well, that, you know, in eating more of these animal-based products, they're getting higher amounts of fat in their diet, but it's coupled with, you know, frequent doses of that sugar, even if it is in that natural fructose form. So how concerned should I be about that high level of fat paired with that sugar? And then also I wanted to ask you about cured meats. You know, you mentioned feed the kids the things that they enjoy. Well, a lot of kids, you know, they maybe don't always want the pure meat. They want, you know, some of the cured meats. And so is it okay for them to include those things like salami and hot dogs and pepperoni if that's what we can get them to eat? Is it better to be animal based and eating meat heavy, or not? How do you navigate that when you're not able to go all in for your kids?
Well, look, there's a certain ingredient, and the closer you get to just meat, you know, the better. And so if you're not quite there, that's still better than if you're eating less meat entirely, right? So, you know, even having a few little things added in is certainly going to be better than if you had a lot of other stuff added in. So it's not one or the other. It's not just like, no, you're vegan or you're carnivore and like nothing else, you know? And so it's the more meat is better. So the more meat you eat, the more meat your kids eat, the better. That's where they get the nutrients. That's what they need to eat, right? And they need the fat. You know, fat is not a calorie source. It is an essential nutrient. It's a compilation of essential nutrients. They're essential fatty acids that you have to have, or you don't develop properly. You're not well, and you can die. There are essential fat soluble nutrients that you have to have, or you don't develop well and you die. So, you know, these are very important. And so when people say, well, you don't want to eat too much fat, there's no such thing. Your body has a limited capacity to absorb fat. You make bile, and that's how you absorb fat. You run out of bile, your body can't absorb fat more than a small percentage, right? A little bit gets in, usually like MCTs. And so the rest of it goes out, you know? So physiologically, I just disagree with the premise that you can overeat fat, because your body will not absorb it, right? And so saying, well, you don't want to eat too much fat if you're eating sugar, then there's too much. No. It's the sugar. The sugar is the problem. The sugar is always, well, but when you're having sugar, then fat. No, that sugar is the problem. Sugar is the only problem. And yes, sugar can make things worse, and sugar can make your metabolism of fat worse, but it's still the sugar doing it. It is not the fat doing it. It is always the sugar. The fat is still essential. The fat is still something that their brains and their bodies need. The sugar is not. And so, you know, if I would not give up the fat because they're having sugar, I would just try to limit the sugar and try to impress upon them that, hey, this isn't the best for us. You're already doing a great job. You know, you're already, you know, sort of steering them in the right direction. They're maybe not quite there yet, but they'll get there. You know, they're seeing you, they're seeing your results, they're seeing how well you're doing. They're feeling better, and they're going to start noticing, you know, the more they eat meat, the more they like it, the the more they feel good, they start eating this other crap, and it's like, oh, I don't really feel good. And you can point that out. Be like, oh, I'm not really feeling well. It's like, well, you had that pizza yesterday. That can do all these things to your body. Be like, oh, okay, damn it. That pizza was good, but I don't like feeling like crap. And you just sort of, help them understand the differences in how their body feels, is due to the different things that they eat. So, eating processed meats, depending on what's in them, obviously, different sausages, salamis, pepperonis, you look at the packet and see the ingredients. Some are just dreadful. So I just sort of avoid those and try to get ones that have less sort of starches and oats and sugars added to them. There are some that have much less than that. And so you just sort of try to get those, but if they'll eat bacon, and that's fine. It's going to be a lot better than eating, plants or bread or something like that. So, I think it's very beneficial to eat more meat. And obviously it's also beneficial to eat less of the other things, but the more meat you eat, that's going to replace out the other things that they eat. So they're just going to largely be eating meat. And that's better than, again, 99.99% of what people are eating these days. So they're going to be a lot better off for that. They're going to develop better. If they get perfect, that's perfect. But before they get there, they're already going to be making a lot of improvements. Sugar's nasty. I mean, natural fruit sugar, fructose, all that stuff. We call it natural. That's a marketing ploy, because if it's natural, it must be good, just like arsenic and cyanide, right? So, it's like that's not necessarily a good thing, just because it's natural. In fact, most natural things will kill you. Plants make about 1 million different chemicals, most of which will kill you. They're all natural, right? None of these are pesticides that we spray on them industrially. That's what people don't realize. Before, there were all these altruistic, wonderful humanitarian people protecting all the plants by spraying them with pesticides to stop all the insects eating them. They could protect themselves. They stopped the insects and animals from eating them themselves because they made their own poisons. And so, most natural things will kill you. We have a very narrow window of things that we can eat safely. And so it's, just saying something is natural is probably not good. What's natural for us, what's natural for humans is eating meat. It's actually not natural for us to be eating all the crap that we're eating today, even broccoli, which is not natural in itself. That's an invention, a few thousand years ago, whenever the hell they made that horrible weed. They just, it did not exist in nature. Pretty much none of the plants that we eat now existed in nature. They've all been hybridized or bred and GMO'd and all the rest of this stuff. So it is natural for us to eat meat. And so if you want to go by what's natural, that's what's natural. Something that exists in nature, like lions, maybe not. That's not necessarily something that's good for you. And so, but I think you're doing great, just working them in that direction and just, keeping impressing upon this. You push too hard, it's too heavy handed, they're going to go, well, I'm not going to listen to you. So you just lead by example. You lead from the front, and, like any good general, and you just say like, hey, look, this is what I'm doing. And you just point out, hey, this is going to be better for these reasons. And you take them shopping with you, and you talk about, the ingredients. Well, I'm not going to do this because this has this and this, and I'm going to buy this because it's better, and all that other sort of stuff. They will learn this stuff, and you will be surprised. 30 years later, they will be doing that to other people, and, even if it's a struggle now, it will make a deep and lasting impression on your kids.
Thank you for that, Dr. Chaffee. I appreciate it. And I know you don't yet have kids of your own, but you have a lot of really great practical tips that I think a lot of the listeners will be able to use in their own lives and trying to guide their kids that way. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. And thank you. I hope it's helpful anyway. It's hard to, I see what other people do with their kids. I've seen what worked on me and what was a terrible idea. And obviously I, help out with my girlfriend's kids and my nieces and nephews and all that sort of stuff. So, but yeah, it is different, and every parent-child relationship is different. And so it's hard to give specific advice. You can only speak really in generalities and what we can try to do overall, but it's up to, it's up to the parents to sort of figure out what the best way to deal with their kids are.
Love it. That was great. I want to give the next question to my wife here, Anna.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Chaffee, for joining and just educating us and sharing your knowledge. I just really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Just to go into my question a little bit, I just want to, Nia kind of did this too, and so did Rebecca. I think just as a parent, like, we are willing to do things ourselves a little bit because, you're putting yourself at risk, you're not putting your kid at risk. And then you're a little more hesitant to let your kid do the same thing, if you're not sure what it's going to do to your kid. And so I think for me, like, William eats some fruits and things right now. And GT and I actually had a deep discussion about, why do we think that way? Why, what's the reason behind? What are we afraid of? And I think it's really like, how is it going to affect him long term? So my question was, and I think this is a good question for a lot of people, when you were doing your research and looking at studies and things, are there any negative effects that those studies listed for kids who had been on carnivore for a while? Or are there research like that there are longitudinal studies out there like that?
No, not in like carnivore specifically, not that they've taken like a cohort of kids and raised them one way and raised the other. A lot of the studies, so there weren't really any studies on carnivore. They weren't even calling it carnivore. So I had to sort of ask questions about, being in ketosis, about different sorts of diseases, about, prevalence in, different time periods, about, different native populations and their development of chronic diseases and when that happened and how that happened, about, asking the question, okay, is autism related to diet? It came up at the exact same time that I sort of looked that up. Okay, when did the numbers start coming up? It came up at the exact same time all these other chronic diseases coming up. Could this be something to do with diet? Okay. And I started looking into that and I found like, wow, yeah, actually preconception diet where you eat mostly red meat protects against autism. Mothers that have higher saturated fat intake during pregnancy, lower rates of kids with autism. Higher LDL during pregnancy, lower rates of autism. Mothers who breastfeed instead of bottle feed, lower rates of autism. So, and then the Texas A&M research looking at carnitine. So there are all these sorts of things, but they're not carnivore specific. It's just things that add to the picture. Eating plants, eating sugar. That's what I was asking about sugar. Because formula has a lot of can have a lot of sugar in it. So I said, okay, is there a difference in autism between breastfeeding and bottle feeding? There is. So that suggests that there may be something to do with sugar consumption that can be harmful, but it's not conclusive. It's certainly not carnivore versus non-carnivore. As far as I have never come across anything that showed anything about ketosis or just eating meat or lack of vegetables as being harmful. There are plenty of studies, epidemiological studies, obviously, that show that kids that are raised in vegetarian households have lower bone density, shorter stature, more developmental issues, and poor dentition, things like that. So certainly things that are showing harm in the other direction. And then what I think the most important things to look at is, does this hurt kids long term or is this beneficial long term? You look at every single native population in the world that's switched to from a carnivore to an agrarian based diet. We saw this, I talked about how there's this clear disparity in the height and health of populations when they switch to agriculture. We are seeing this in real time right now. We saw this last century with the Native Americans, the Plains Indians in North America that were just eating bison. The study in 2001 showed that they were the tallest population of humans on Earth at that time. Now they are not. So there's a clear disparity when they stopped eating their primary diet of just meat and they switched over to a more Western-based diet with a bunch of plants. This is long before the bison were killed out, long before the processed food craze happened, and the height and health dramatically spiked. So actually that hurt their kids, and their kids did not develop to their genetic potential, and now they have 4 times the rates of chronic disease than the rest of Americans do, right? Because Europeans have had 10,000 years to get accustomed and acclimatized to some of the toxins in plants. Native Americans have not. They've had 100 years, not long enough, absolutely not long enough. So they're more susceptible to an improper diet, more susceptible to the toxins in plants, and more reliant on the nutrients in meat. And so it hits them harder. We're seeing this in the native Australian population. I speak to people that work with the Aboriginal Australian native population, and they say this is actually known in the Aboriginal population that, you know, they're in the cities, they're eating city food, they're, you know, eating like crap, you know, probably drinking, doing whatever, and they get sick, they get fat, they get unwell, and they know you get sick enough, you just go out into the middle of the bush and you just hang out with, you know, your family out there that's just living more naturally, and you're just eating goanna and kangaroo and things like that, and you just spend a few months there and you get healthy again and you come back, you know. So it's well known. We see that there's the Australian Aboriginal, these guys were ripped. You see these pictures from the 1800s and things like that. You know, these guys are just white haired and just chiseled, right? And it was like 4 generations. This guy's a great grandfather, and he's cut. He's like more shredded than I am, you know. And it's just like he's an old man. And so, you know, and that changed. That changed dramatically. Their height changed dramatically. There was a battle in Western Australia where I live in the 1800s, I think in the 1840s, something like that. And there's with, you know, the British and the Aboriginals, and obviously, you know, it was a bit of a slaughter because, you know, guns, you know, they had more firepower and things like that on the British side. But a couple of years later, they went back to the side of this battlefield, and they were looking around. There's just, you know, obviously skeletons everywhere, and they found that the skeletons of the Aboriginals were just giant size. They were just like, holy crap, these guys were huge. They said that the forearms of the Aboriginals were longer than the outstretched arms of the British soldiers, right? These guys are huge, just huge, right? Bullets take down huge people too. But, you know, these were big dudes. They are not that anymore. There are some that are very tall now too. That's not the norm. And so, you know, this is the Maasai, you know, they're very healthy in 1930. And they started introducing millet at that point. In the 1970s, they're eating a lot more corn and millet, and heart disease shows up for the first time in the Maasai population. Now they're eating a lot of corn, and Coca-Cola has delivery trucks that show up every goddamn day, and then they sell out within minutes, and diabetes is, you know, climbing and soaring. So no, I've never seen anything to suggest that eating this way would hurt kids. I've seen a lot of evidence to suggest that it would help them in every single way.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. You know, like, I think if people are hesitant, you know, I think that information will help them, you know, just to help give them reassurance that it's okay to put your kids on carnivore, and maybe that'll give them the boost to do it. So I appreciate
well, I mean, yeah, no problem. Well, you know, that's the thing, is to say, do we have, it's like, well, where's your longitudinal, you know,
right,
randomized controlled trial and all sort of,
yeah.
First of all, it's sort of hard to do that with people and with the kids.
Yeah.
You're not going to really get ethical approval for those sorts of things. But there are just a ton of evidence that you can relate to this. There's physiology, there's biology, there's, you know, anthropology and paleoanthropology. There are reams of data that show that this is the healthiest way to go. And, you know, so, you know, evidence exists outside of a randomized controlled trial. There are no randomized controlled trials showing that parachutes work. Are you going to use one?
Yeah.
Right? Probably. You know, there's no randomized controlled trial that shows the Pythagorean theorem works. And yet we figured out that, yeah, no, that's a thing, you know? And so, you know, you have evidence that exists outside of that. The studies are great, but all studies can do is help guide you. And then you have to make a decision in your life, and you see what happens. And if your life goes in a very different direction than the study would suggest, then that study doesn't apply to you, or may not be a good study at all. And so, you know, studies are academia. You know, studies are things that, you know, people publish these things to, you know, to get credentials so they can get jobs and things like that, and get into different schools or whatever, and get into drag programs or whatever. That's academia. Science is experimentation. Science is looking at the evidence. Science is looking at all bodies of evidence and saying, okay, what can we figure out here, and using your brain, and then experimenting and saying, okay, let's see what happens. And so that's what we're doing. We're taking all this evidence that has existed for millions of years. We're correlating it and saying, okay, well, I'm based on this evidence, I'm going to eat this way. And your life dramatically changes. Your health improves, your kids' health improves, their development improves, and all these diseases go away. You stop taking all these medications. And so, okay, well, there you go. That was a very positive experiment that you ran there. And it doesn't matter what a study says, because that is what happened in real life. You know, as the physicist Richard Feynman said, it doesn't matter how brilliant your theory is, and it doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with the experiment, it's wrong. And so that's the thing. He said, well, if you eat meat, you're going to get sick and die, and yet the exact opposite happens. Okay, it's wrong. You're wrong. So, you know, that's what you do. So there's plenty of evidence out there. There are more and more studies coming out. You know, Courtney doing her PhD in this obviously is going to be at the forefront of that, which is, I think, is great. That more and more people in her position are going to start actually putting out studies and research and data saying, hey, look, this is what we're finding. And, you know, it may be that it's just like, oh crap, oof, you know, maybe these studies are showing things are wrong. It's not going to, you know, but it could happen. And it's important to get those studies out there. There's enough information for me to make that decision in my life. And that's improved my life. And I've applied this to my patients. It has improved my patients. I have yet to see a single patient who has not improved their health in very positive ways if they're able to do this. And so, you know, there is evidence that exists outside of studies and all this, or, you know, randomized control trials and things like that. And you have to use that. You know, that's what we use for parachutes, right? We're not gonna like, you know, we'll have 50 people jump out without a parachute. I mean, could be placebo, you know, that just landing safely could be placebo. Well, you know, there's a thing called physics, you know, and we can use these physical laws and apply them in realistic terms and real life terms to situations to say, hey, this is what we should see. And then you experiment and you say, oh, look at that. Yeah, it does do that. And that's what we're doing here. You know, we're applying, you know, physical laws, chemical laws, biochemical laws, biological laws, botanical laws, and just facts. The fact is plants have defense chemicals. The fact is humans have been eating meat for millions of years. The fact is these diseases have not shown up before the 20th century, except for Egypt, you know, when they were eating a shitload of wheat and beer, and they had beer guts and man boobs. And the Ebers Papyrus showed that they knew what angina was. They knew what heart attacks were. They knew what diabetes was, you know, and that's because they were plagued with it because they were eating crap, just like we're eating crap now. And so there's just tons and tons and tons of evidence if you know where to look.
Now, Dr. Chaffee, I was wondering if you could help me out here quick. Being on YouTube and I eat carnivore with my son, I get 2 comments, and I was hoping you could just quickly address them so I could post the link to this video and shut these people up sometimes. One of the comments I get is that I'm stunting my son's growth, and I'm making him more susceptible to a heart attack later on in life by having him on carnivore. What do you have to say, bud?
Okay. Well, I mean, all the populations that have eaten meat or exclusively meat or near exclusively meat have always been taller than every population alive now. There's a clear disparity pre and post agriculture. They dropped by 5 inches. Brains were 11% smaller for men, 17% smaller for women. And that was pre-agriculture. There were obviously hunter-gatherers that were already gathering things, and they figured out you could plant them and you wouldn't have to, you know, go so far to gather these things. They were on average 5'9". Then after post-agriculture, on average 5'5". You go back to the mammoth hunters, you go back to the megafauna hunters, they're on average 6'2" to 6'4", right? And the Native Americans, the Plains Indians, were the tallest population of humans on Earth when they're eating meat and only meat, right? And so that is just completely against the evidence, right? That is someone who simply does not know what the evidence says. As far as heart disease is concerned, more and more and more large studies, randomized controlled trials, meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials are all showing that there is no correlation at all between saturated fat consumption and cardiovascular disease. And in fact, the Journal of the American College of Cardiology published a massive literature review in 2020 showing that there was no association. In fact, there was an inverse association with stroke. So the more saturated fat people ate, the less strokes they were having. The less saturated fat they ate, the more strokes they were having. So this is actually protective against heart disease, as you would expect if this were a natural diet, which all the hard evidence shows that it was. Heart disease didn't exist before the 20th century. Now it's the #1 killer. The first heart attack diagnosed on autopsy, proven on autopsy, was in 1912. That's when we're eating the least amount of meat in 120 years, until the next 10 years when we're eating even less. And then it became more prevalent. They didn't believe the guy at first. He published this and went, wow, this is a brand new thing. No one's ever seen anyone die from this before. And he described it. And they said, you're full of it. No one's seen that. That's not a thing. You got that wrong. 10 years later, they started going like, okay, well, maybe there's some merit to this because more people started dying from this. More people started seeing it. More people started publishing on it. 10 years after that, in the 1930s, it's the #1 killer in America, right? It went down. We were eating less meat in 1920 and 1930 than we were in 1912 when the first heart attacks showed up. We're eating less meat. We didn't increase the meat and then heart attacks went up. We reduced meat and saturated fat and heart disease went up. And that was the low point in 200 years. There was a U-shaped curve from the early 1800s to now. And that was the bottom of the point that we were eating meat. So we were eating the least amount of meat in 200 years, and it spiked up to being the #1 killer in America. Makes no damn sense. And there was no heart disease in the 1800s. So there was no correlation. There was no relation. There was no association between increased meat and animal fat and saturated fat intake and heart disease. In fact, there's inverse correlations or inverse relationships. And if you can never show causation from associative studies. You cannot. That's just a definition of statistics. There are no causative studies. There are no studies that can show causation. Only correlation, and they're weak at correlation, and they've been shown to be fraudulent since then. There is no correlation. As you can see, for 200 years, has been no correlation between heart disease rates and meat consumption, none. And then you go back further than that, you go back thousands of years, meat consumption is going up and down and up and down and up and down. Heart disease didn't exist, right? And so there's no correlation. You can't prove causation from correlation, but if you show that there's no correlation, then that proves there's no causation. You have to have correlation to have causation, to have a cause and effect relationship. And there just isn't any, So the fact that people are still clinging on to this is, I guess it's understandable. We've been drilling this into our heads for the last 50 years, but it is strictly against the evidence.
I love it. I appreciate you helping me out with that. Now, I want to respect your time. Do you have to go right away, or do you have time for one or two more questions if anybody on the panel has them?
I do have a bit of time. I have to sort of leave around the half hour just to get to work. But I still have a few minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody have one last minute question? Did you think you want Courtney?
Yeah, absolutely. So Dr. Chaffee, we've had a really great discussion about the current nutritional landscape, especially in westernized countries. And we're reaching this point where the research is pointing in this direction that, between plant toxicology and evolutionary history, that maybe we've gotten some things wrong along the way, right? So just a little bit of stats, because I want to ask you a question about perception from a healthcare provider standpoint. Okay. So in the United States, we're looking at about 15 million kids with overweight or obesity, right? They're claiming that of these 15 million, there's only 300,000 diagnosed with diabetes type 1 or type 2. So it brings to mind the idea of, we have all of these kids and all these families who are in situations where they're trying to hear about how to take that next step forward in preventing their health. And one of the biggest things that I always say is, I don't want to raise my child to reach adulthood and have a lifetime of reversing chronic disease to have to be facing, right? So for parents out there who maybe acknowledge that their kid is overweight, right? Maybe they're recognizing that the carnivore diet is the way to go, and we can start being proactive now to set that child up for a successful, healthy future, right? But the statistics and the epidemiological data is not showing that despite children meeting the diagnostic criteria for things like type 2 diabetes, how is the perception from a healthcare provider affected knowing that, hey, we have this problem, but we're not diagnosing it, right? So if I'm taking my overweight child to the provider and they are not acknowledging and they're not doing the statistic, or not the statistical, but like the biomarker data to identify and diagnose, how can we then understand where to move forward? So as a healthcare provider, right, what do we need to do? What kind of changes do you think need to be done in order to start seeing the changes that we aspire to as a healthy nation?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is that it does come down to, the doctor or the provider sort of advocating for their patients, saying, hey, look, well, let's look into this. Let's see what they're doing. Sometimes a lot of medicine at the moment is retrospective medicine as opposed to prospective medicine. They're waiting for just a disaster to happen. The kids just feel horrible. They feel awful. They do this. Okay, well, let's just check your glucose. Oh, it's 4600. Okay, great. All right, we'll do something about that. Or someone. I mean, like for. First of all, the reference ranges are just in the lab tests. They aren't even accurate. So a doctor would say, well, it's in the reference ranges. That's fine. But that's not fine because that's an average for the community. The first 2,000 people that come in for a lab test at that lab, that is the reference range. And that's why every single lab in every single city have different reference ranges everywhere in the world. And so that's not right. The average person is overweight. The average person is sick. 93% of Americans have at least one metabolic disease. 70% of Americans are overweight or obese. So that's who you're comparing yourself to. So you say, oh, you're right in the range. Oh, great. So I'm fat and sick. Great. Sounds good. And so that's not what you want to look at. So there's different reference ranges of actual health. But however, even if they're outside of that, some doctors will say, well, we don't even look at it until it's way out of range. Because, oh, it's a little off. Nah, we'll just keep an eye on it. Why would you just keep an eye on it? Why wouldn't you do something proactive about it? And so I've spoken to people that, have had issues with their thyroid. They just weren't feeling great. They were just really low energy, and they checked it, and they're like their thyroid stimulating hormone, which goes up to, their reference range is like 0.4 to 4. Better range is 0.3 to 1.5. That's the one range we use at my clinic. And so they were a bit outside of that. So but not markedly elevated, but had a very proactive doctor that said, okay, well, look, why is that? You haven't had any thyroid issues before. Thyroid's always been fine before. Now it's a little off. Let's see why. Tested him for Hashimoto's antibodies. Sure enough, had Hashimoto's disease, right? So that's catching that early. That's doing something about it, before it becomes a problem. Spoke to his normal primary care doctor, and they said, yeah, we would normally not even look at it until the TSH was over 10. I was like, what? It's just like, oh, we just don't think it's that big a deal until you hit 10, and you go like, oh, okay, well, why is this? Hashimoto's antibodies are in the thousands at that point, and you have a disaster on your hands. So a lot of things is retrospective. There's a disaster, someone is just floridly sick, and then you go, oh, okay, all right, let's try and do something about it. Instead of looking and saying, okay, what's on the horizon? If you don't change what you're doing, what's going to happen 5 years from now? Checking fasting insulin as opposed to just blood sugar is fine. Okay, but your insulin can be elevated for 15 years before you get any elevation in your blood sugar. That's pre-diabetes. That's already a metabolic dysfunction, and that can cause a lot of other problems having this chronically elevated insulin. So I think it comes down to having doctors rethink this, not looking at things as a retrospective medicine approach, but as a prospective medicine approach, trying to catch things before it becomes a problem. Obviously, you have to justify certain things to the insurance companies, or they won't pay for it. A lot of the stuff I do is all private. People have to pay for out of their pocket, but they want to because they have. No one has a more of an interest in their own health than themselves. And so they're coming in saying, okay, you guys do things differently. I'm willing to pay out of pocket for these tests because I know they won't get covered, but I want to be in good health. I want to see what the hell is going on. And so sometimes, doctors will just be like, well, I can't order a test or an investigation unless there's nice hats and unless there's, florid problem, a specific thing. So, they might be limited, but, it's just, I think it'd be massive just changing those reference ranges. Like if we didn't just do the average for the community, if we sort of agreed upon like, hey, why don't we stick to these reference ranges? These are reference ranges of good health. I think it would just revolutionize medicine where doctors, because they would just see if they didn't know better, they'd just be like, wow, that's out of range. They're just looking for things to be in range or out of range. Well, that's out of range. Holy crap, but so many more things would be out of range, if you change those reference range. For instance, the optimal reference range for B12 is, I've never seen a reference range anywhere in the US or Australia or Europe that actually even the top end of that even gets into what I would consider an appropriate range for B12. And there's a lot of other things that apply to that too. It's difficult if people are not testing for it, you're not going to find it. And if you're waiting for it to just be a disaster before you test for it, obviously, you're going to have more problems, and the kids are going to be sicker. The people are going to be a lot sicker by the time you get it. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of medicine at the moment. We just practice retrospective medicine. I think we need to change that to a prospective approach and try to think about how we can prevent disease, prevent problems from becoming more and more of an issue in the future. And I think that would change a lot of things. And we wouldn't be in the disaster we're in now anyway.
Thank you so much. That was a great answer. And I also appreciate your time being here and sharing with the community. Thanks so much.
No problem. Thank you.
I just have one last question before you take off, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I got to ask you anyways, because my buddy Kerry from Homestead Hollow told me to ask you this question, and I told him I would. When you become a father, are you going to put your child on the carnivore diet?
Yeah, 100. There will be no plants in my house. When I have kids, absolutely not. So it's easier when you start out with this, because like that just will not be in their universe, And so by the time they're getting exposed to other people, they're just going to be looking at that like, I don't want anything to do with that. I hope, that's the sort of the plan, is just to sort of teach them early and young that stuff's not food. This is what we eat. This is what we're supposed to eat. I've had friends that have raised their kids from birth as carnivores, and they have relatives that are trying to buy their affection with candies and cookies and all that sort of stuff. And she tells them like, hey, don't give my kids this crap. I don't want them eating it. It's not good for them. Don't give it to them. And you get to choose that. You're like, hey, you're gonna give this shit to my kids. You're not gonna get to hang out with my kids. But some people still do. And she actually was just sort of watching, and she saw them, her actual mother-in-law giving her like a little cookie or little piece of cake or something like that. Kid's like 1.5. The only thing she's ever eaten was meat. The only thing she ever wanted to eat was meat. She's excited. She's never had to struggle with forcing her to eat or getting her to eat. Every time it's just excited, slapping the table, freaking out, getting the meat. And she's like getting impatient, like, get it, like yelling at her mom to like get the meat over to her. And the mother-in-law gave her like this little piece of cake, and she just looked at it and went, and just threw it on the floor. She just like walked away. She's like, good. So that's what I'm going to try to do with mine. But no, there absolutely not be, any crap in the house. It just will not. I will not accept any ingredient or anything in that house. House plants aside, like that's it. There just will not be anything in that house when that kid's there. That will not be acceptable. And so, it's just it's nice to be able to get them from birth like that. It's difficult when you're sort of, they're half grown and you have to sort of talk to them about it. And they're at that sort of delicate age where they don't really understand why the hell you're changing their lives so much from something that they really enjoyed. But when you have it a fresh start, you can really make some good headway and just start them off as good as you can and just teach them early on, like, hey, this is how we eat and this is why, and this is the right thing to do. And they were really, really impressionable at that age, and they'll really take it. But even up to what was that creepy priest said that give me a child till he's 7 and he's mine for life. That creepy bastard. It's true though. They're very impressionable. At that early age. And so, that's what I will definitely be trying to do. And hopefully that sets them up for a very, very healthy and successful future.
Absolutely. Well, you're a great person. You're a great leader. And I know one day you're going to make a great father, Dr. Chaffee. And I appreciate you coming on here and eliminating a lot of these fears that I think parents and grandparents have when they feeding carnivore. So I appreciate your time. And this has been a blast. I really appreciate you and appreciate everybody on the panel and everybody watching.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. It's been a pleasure. It was great to see all of you. It was a really fun sort of forum. So thank you all for the great questions and for the time. I appreciate all your times.
Absolutely. Well, you guys, that's it.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Doctor. See you guys later.
Great to meet you.
Let's go.